Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. All right, rapid fire. Favorite Halloween candy?
Wow, that was aggressive.
Ray.
Me, not candy corn. Anything but candy corn. It's not so much about me saying what I like, but throwing shade on candy corn. Next.
Such a hater. Jessica.
Feels like a government surplus program to pass it off as candy.
Y'all are haters.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jessica. Uh-oh.
I'll go next.
Jessica's gone.
So I think
Brett.
I would say for me, the classic Halloween candy as far as this time of year is the big pumpkin Reese's.
Mm.
Oh,
that's what I was going to say.
Oh, that's so good. It's so good.
So I'm going to retract my answer.
Muting her on purpose,
so
that he could say that first.
Her. But in a mix, I do like a little Snickers.
Okay,
yeah.
All right,
all
right, Jessica. Are you sticking with pumpkin Reese's or what?
There's just something different about the shaped Reese's when they're in the pumpkin form and egg Christmas tree form.
Yeah, way more peanut butter.
Yeah, yes. They're really good.
The ratio is different.
I get to claim the mom tax, like the dad tax now, with my kids with their Halloween candy. So
yeah,
but I would say those are probably can't go wrong with that.
Wait, so I named your top two as well?
What was the other one?
Oh, you said you were going to change your answer.
Oh, yeah, that one. And I really like Milky Ways.
Oh,
when you said a little Snickers, I was like, oh, I like a little Milky Way.
Yeah. I prefer a Milky Way in small form to large form.
Yeah.
True.
All right, we have guests on today. Brian, what is your Halloween candy of choice?
Skittles. Yeah.
Listen.
Starburst and Skittles, like the fruity stuff. And I think the Halloween bag of Skittles is perfect to dump the whole thing in your mouth. Perfect size.
They are. I mean, that you have a very good point there.
One shot, one smile.
Yeah, there you go. Is it Skittles one of those things that if you leave it in the bag, like I've noticed some Halloween candy, when you leave it in the bag too long, it homogenizes with its neighbors.
Just one giant Skittle.
So hopefully it resists that.
At our family growing up, we had, like, for the candy distribution, we had a jar of chocolate based and a jar of fruit based.
Oh,
kept them separate to not allow that.
That's
to your point, Ray. We took it very seriously, and I'm glad to see someone else here goes against candy corn and also doesn't like to mix those flavors.
I don't like to mix anything chocolate based with anything else.
Candy corn solo, mix it with some peanuts, got a payday.
That's like covering garbage with chocolate, but you
gotta try it. I thought it was.
I have tried that. Actually, it is better. It is better.
Yeah, like grass clippings, terrible. Put it in some ice cream.
Yeah,
right. Pour ranch dressing over it. You call it a salad, so I don't really see what's wrong
there. Ranch dressing on anything, and it makes it better, right?
Candy corn included. Yes.
Listen, I like candy corn by itself.
Oh,
and I'm not afraid to say it. I will eat it.
What happened?
You like the pumpkin form?
Trauma.
Yeah, it's giving Rumspringa. Like, what does this candy? Yeah,
it's like pain for my mouth.
Yeah. So is that your answer? Is candy corn?
No, I was gonna say Smarties.
Smarties?
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh Smarties. My gosh, this is like pre-industrial food candy preferences. Like, sometimes grandmother will throw some maple syrup in the snow and we can suck on it during the,
Okay.
That sounds awesome, but
you're making fun of it. But so back in the day when we used to go to Blockbuster, right? And everybody here remembers going to Blockbuster and getting your movie for the weekend.
We're all elder millennials or older.
Well, Ray's an actual vampire from the 1700s, but other than Ray. My dad used to get all the old fashioned candy from when he was young. So like the wax bottles that they had like liquid in and all that old. Yeah, I had all the old candy, and Mom didn't allow sugar cereal.
If we interviewed your dad and he said that, I wouldn't have made fun of him. But you being, young. And he's like, I could go for a regular M&M. And it's the same thing of like, oh wow, yeah, like what was it like to live through World War II?
Like?
Yeah.
Do you also like the Valentine's Day hearts?
No, those are gross.
Like Necco. What about Necco wafers? Do you like those?
My dad actually loved Necco wafers. I did not like them
because
they had licorice. I don't like licorice flavors, black licorice. So.
Wow. Well, you bring this up and you kind of sprung it on me, and something to be a little serious. To be a little serious is that this is spooky season, and some of us gets really scared. And one of the things that I can think of that is the scariest of all, foodborne illness.
I would say E. coli.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that.
Food safety.
Brian, is it fun that people think about E. coli when they think about you? How's that feel?
Do they really? Yeah. I guess
I think B. Brady E. coli.
Maybe that's better. Yeah, B. Brady E. coli. I think that's probably better than thinking, oh God, food safety.
So Brian, introduce yourself to everybody because we are terrible at doing that.
Yeah, sure. I am Bryan Brady. I work at the Food Connection at UK, which is a relatively, well, I would say new department, but we've really been around for 8 or 9 years now. And part of the goal of the Food Connection is to connect farmers to larger wholesale markets so that they can sell into institutions. And my job in regard to that is to help produce farmers specifically kind of jump through the food safety hurdles of getting what's known as a third-party food safety audit, which is generally required from any kind of buyer that's going to sell into an institution.
Big things. Big important things.
So just to break down a little bit of what you said there, just because sometimes I think people have this idea of the local food world and they imagine things like a farmer's market, or maybe if they're hip, they're aware of what a CSA is or something like that. It's kind of this smaller, rustic, smaller volumes, freshness, all the awesome things we love about local food. And then they also have experience going to the grocery store or going to, out to eat or something like that. And a lot of that stuff, it's kind of like, oh, I don't know where that comes from. But so you're saying that you're working with these local producers that we would think of as local food producers and trying to help them access markets where like lots and lots of people eat that food or buy that stuff. Is that right?
Yes. And with cost effectiveness in mind, we're not trying to push farmers into wholesale markets where they really struggle, but we try to not just help them get through the food safety stuff, but also kind of figure out the markets that make sense for them. But for some growers, the small, medium-sized farms of Kentucky, it's starting to make sense.
So what kind of markets, or like in broad strokes, are these people accessing? Or interested in accessing?
Sure. Not necessarily the Walmarts and Krogers of the world. However, there are some larger groups in Kentucky that kind of aggregate and sell that way. There are some Amish and Mennonite communities, particularly down in Scottsville, that aggregate a lot of product and sell into Walmart and Kroger kind of supply chains. But most of the folks that we're working with are selling into kind of these intermediary wholesale market channels where, let's say University of Kentucky or, other universities, maybe hospitals, things like that are interested in having local food at their salad bar or in their cafeteria, but they participate in buying programs with they're getting their produce from a distributor, and those distributors require these third-party food safety audits to protect themselves if there is any issue with produce. And so when the Food Connection was kind of born out of the contract with the Aramark that University of Kentucky signed, they realized really quickly that there was a huge bottleneck issue with getting these farms into these market channels, that they were going to have these gap audits, and nobody really knew what to do from there.
Yeah, so part of that contract was that the Aramark agreed, as they took over dining services, that they would purchase a certain amount of local food. And yes, they weren't able to supply that because there weren't enough people who were producing enough food that had gone through this process that you're describing of getting an audit.
Correct. Yes.
Now, is an audit is that like a legal requirement? Like, is that a federal? Are the feds coming in and telling us we gotta do this with a gap audit, or is this something else?
No, these gap audits are totally voluntary. The farmer really, this is kind of at the behest of the buyer. If you have a buyer that you have in mind or a buyer that wants to buy from you, it's really the buyer that requires the audit. There are a couple of different types, and these are generally referred to as good agricultural practice audits or gap audits. And there are a couple of different audit schemes, but generally, if you're going to sell to a distributor or somebody who's aggregating produce, they're going to require you as a buyer to have some sort of gap audit. And again, that is just kind of a protection to cover yourself type thing that everybody does along the supply chain.
I hear a lot of comments from my local producers, Bryan, that even if something like that is not required at whatever level they're doing it, they're starting to be of the opinion now. And I'm glad that they need to make, I hear this comment a lot, all reasonable efforts to ensure, the utmost safety. And that's becoming more of a prevalent thought, which I'm really glad of that. I think the more that you can give yourself knowledge to keep whatever product that you're offering up, to keep that as safe as possible is a good thing. So I'm kind of glad. So, and that in turn, kind of as producers get a little bit bigger that I've worked with, they're more, it doesn't take much to persuade them to go through whatever processes they need to be formally recognized, through these audits and things. And I'm kind of glad the attitude seems to be better now, much better than it was, let's say 15, 20 years ago. It was a much different time then for horticulture products in Kentucky, it seems like.
Yeah, I think we've seen the attitude shift as well. I think that people in general can also use the planning that goes around getting prepared for these audits to also help them. They generally just feel more organized on the farm in general. But we do a lot of one-on-one help on farm, and when we go out there, a lot of these farms are already doing some of the stuff that's required. A lot of this just comes down to writing it down and keeping records. There are things that a lot of times we are going to help you change a couple things here and there, but everybody's of the same mindset where if one farm fails at this and somebody gets sick, then it will affect, Kentucky produce across the market. We're usually not talking about farmers market level farms in this regard, but they would be affected too if there was a big, human pathogen outbreak from produce. And, so everybody's kind of in this together and does seem to have a better attitude about it than when I started.
That makes sense because when you think back about when they had issues with melons and stuff that were happening nationwide, even though it wasn't necessarily in our state, but it all trickles all the way back down to some of your local farmers market vendors where people might be a little leery of purchasing some of those items once things hit the media and social media, with all that information.
So to clarify or confuse, I don't know. So you've got this gap audit stuff that you're talking about, and so that's like a certification process where you get checked out. You have lots of record keeping. You're just showing that you're taking the steps to try to prevent that stuff from happening. So you got that, and I think of that almost like a different version of almost like you have to have your food handler's permit in order to work, and like at a food restaurant or something like that. It's the business is requiring it because it makes sense, but it's not. But there are some other things, and we won't go too far down this rabbit hole because we could have some other folks we could bring in to talk about there are some federal law around food safety stuff hovering out there. Is that correct?
Yes. So the big one is the Food Safety Modernization Act, and that's generally referred to as FSMA. And it covers the entire food chain. And the part that affects Kentucky produce farmers is the produce safety rule. And this law was passed all the way back in 2011. It was so it was even before the cantaloupe listeria outbreak. I think it was. I believe there were a couple of like spinach E. coli outbreaks that became really, really big news, and kind of the public started to realize that, there if something like that happens, then people from all 50 states can be affected because, the spinach that you're buying at the grocery store could all be coming from one enormous farm. And so they passed the Food Safety Modernization Act, and then it has taken until now and even longer. There's still some things they're working through to kind of hammer home what these regulations are going to look like, what farms are going to be affected. There's been tons of back and forth with producer groups, and they have been relatively flexible as they've implemented this. And so now we're kind of in this phase with FSMA where the rules are there, the trainings are available. Now the states are doing kind of the work and the training and the enforcement. The state departments of ag are doing it for the FDA. So in Kentucky, we've got a training that goes along with it that the Department of Ag and Food Safety or Food Systems Innovation Center at UK kind of head up. And yeah, it's that is a regulation. And so if you meet a couple of these requirements along, it has to do with, do you grow covered produce, which is generally going to be the type of produce that people eat raw. When you think about produce, there's very few things out there that we buy from the grocery store that we're eating raw. Either we're going to cook it, or it's been cooked beforehand when it's been value added, turned into a value added product. But with produce, there's quite a few things where we are just eating it raw, and it is growing in a field. And it's great and it's good for us, and we should be eating those things, but there's risk involved with that. And so that's why there is federal regulation around the stuff that's eaten raw. And if you grow a certain amount from a money perspective, then you do get covered by this rule, and you might end up having an inspection from the State Department of Ag.
And I guess all that being said, that's what brings people to you. Hopefully that they know about you, a person like you as a resource. Is that sort of the motivation they learn through however method or information source they learn about you? And is that what brings them to you at that point sometimes when they realize that there is regulations, or either that or that they're at that level of production to where they have to officially, I guess, or by regulation, get a gap audit? Or are they getting ahead of the curve?
Well, so over the 8 years I've been here, people have been kind of funneled to me through different ways, and the majority of them are funneled to me for that gap audit assistance, that voluntary audit that you would get. But there's so much confusion from the FSMA rollout along, whether it be from farmers or all the way to county agents to even extension associates and specialists, that there's a lot of rumors about, oh, this is going to be required. And so with something like this, when you hear the word regulation, like things kind of get thrown around. So I get people related to FSMA stuff too. But we've tried to, we talked about this earlier. It's just it's been difficult to communicate to everybody what's required of them. But with FSMA, that's the regulation. In Kentucky, there is a course that's free for farmers that you have to take once in a lifetime. And so that's something that, we've been, not necessarily but I do help do the trainings. But lots of other agencies that are in charge of it have been trying to communicate to farmers that this is something that's available to them and that they'll need to do.
So without going too far into the weeds here, I just want to emphasize why this is so notable or interesting or whatever. So if you joke that, people say, oh, food safety, and kind of cringe or roll their eyes or fall asleep or run away. I don't know what the breakdown on the reactions are, but it's taking this thing that we all kind of agree on, that when I go and get food from a place and I eat it, I would like to not get sick.
What?
And trying to figure out how to make that a real thing through all these networks of people, all the different, kind of gross, kind of inspiring, all the different hands that touch that product in the course of it being delivered to you. And that to me, it's like this weird, such an intensely fundamental human thing of like, we're trying to protect people from getting sick. That is like the reason why we're doing all this. And yes, all the stuff is kind of annoying sometimes, and the double checks and the triple checks. But I think with your orientation with the gap audit and with the kind of that industry oriented audit requirement that was, and correct me if I'm wrong, was kind of out ahead of a lot of the Food Safety Modernization Act. These gap audits have been happening for a while before that. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so like these larger networks had some of that in place. I'm just kind of curious, pragmatically, what are the types of things that farms tend to do better once they've worked with you, or that, if they're trying to make their food safer, or at least enhance the odds of it being safe? What are the types of actual practical steps that you see playing out like on the ground that people are doing?
That's a good question. So, one thing that we try to tell farms when we first meet with them is, you're probably doing a lot of the stuff that's required of you already. But as far as the stuff that they may need to implement that they're not already doing, I would say, like, let's take washing produce, for example. There's kind of this idea amongst farms and farmers, and that washing is better. And the reality of washing produce is you're not going to, from a human pathogenic sense, make it safer by washing it. You are just generally doing this from a marketing standpoint. So yeah, if you're harvesting something in the dead of summer that is some sort of leafy vegetable that's going to benefit from the benefit from cooling from water, or benefit just in general from something like dunk washing, uh, or let's say, yeah, you're harvesting root vegetables and you're trying to sell them with the leaves still attached and you want them to look really pretty at market, then you're going to want to use some sort of rinse station or something like that from a marketing standpoint. But every time you introduce water, every time you wash, you are bringing about different food safety implications. The one in particular I think that people don't generally know about is if with dunk washing, or so when I say dunk washing, I mean we're going to fill up a big tub essentially with water, municipal water for sure. We're going to fill up a big tub with water, and we're going to take our product and we're going to dunk it in there to kind of get, and this is generally like lettuce heads, leafy greens, stuff like that. We're dunking it in there to get the dirt off and that let that sink to the bottom, and then taking it out, drying it, and then storing it. The thing that is not usually common knowledge is that you really need to use a sanitizer in that water. If you think of it kind of as a pool, or like what's the object of using a sanitizer in a community pool? It's not to clean you when you get in the pool. It's to keep the water clean so that if somebody has something, some sort of pathogen, and they get in the pool, it doesn't make everybody else in the pool sick. So I'd say that's probably the most common one. Other things are like cleaning food contact surfaces. Really, so most farms are already cleaning things and using like dish soap and water to rinse harvest tools and things like that. There's an extra added step of sanitization that generally takes place. And if you worked at a restaurant or something, you probably know the 3-compartment sink, where the first sink is soap and water, then there's a rinse sink or a dunk sink, and then there's sanitizer. And that sanitizer, adding that at the end and letting it dry, is just an extra step of precaution or safety. So yeah, the use of sanitizers is a big one.
Well, I think, as I think of it analytically, when you're trying to make an operation food safe, you have to be right thousands or millions of times, and you only really have to be wrong once.
No
and
pressure.
and so you're like building in all of these systems to try to keep from making kind of silly errors. And I think the other thing that's interesting in talking with you and talking with Dr. Paul Priesh, who works with more with the FSMA stuff and the that we were talking about with the regulations. Maybe we'll have him on to talk about FSMA at some point. Is that like it's not like a lot of this. I guess sometimes maybe it is really egregious mistakes that people make, but a lot of times these food safety things are caused by really hard to predict things, and that's why they build these audits out and they built these the regulation out, is to try to sort of say these are the ways that we know that things get contaminated. Here's how to kind of prevent that. But I remember I think it was one of the cantaloupe outbreaks. The way that it happened was that there was a little pool of water outside one of the packing houses that had collected, and there was a truck that was coming in to pick stuff up that had been at some point on like a cattle farm or some livestock farm. And as it's driving by, the little bit of cow residue on the tires hits the water, splashes the water into the packing house, which then spreads so it wasn't like they were running their cattle through the cantaloupe field and then pulling them out and not washing them or whatever. And it's just those little, it reminds me of the like thing. I don't know if you all did this in school. They would like put the dye thing on your hand, and then you would go and like touch stuff and be like, wash your hands. And then you didn't get it off or whatever. It's like that kind of thing. And so you're just trying to be overly,
mindful.
Cautious and mindful about trying to put these things into place. And a lot of it is kind of installing like protocols in place. Is that right? I mean, as much as specific practices, it's like documenting it.
Yes. So we utilize standard operating procedures a ton. And what a standard operating procedure is, or it's generally referred to as an SOP, is a kind of series of steps for a task that are written out so that anybody that does those tasks does them exactly the same way every time. There's actually, it's actually relatively easy to write them. If you have a task that you want to write an SOP for, one person can sit down with paper and pen, and the other person can perform the task. And as you perform the task, you kind of break it down into simple steps. And then you would, kind of pass that along to somebody else to use that draft that you've created, watch them do it. If they screw up or do something you don't want them to do, then you've identified something, that you need to fix in the SOP. And, there are lots of tools out there for you to do it now. One of the things when we sometimes do food safety plan writing workshops, and one of the things that we show people now is that you can actually use AI to help you write standard operating procedures relatively well. You can't use it to do everything for you. Obviously, there's lots of caveats with that, and you need to double check it just in the same way that you would double check it if you wrote it yourself. But yeah, anything repeatable on the farm that you want somebody to do the same way, that encompasses kind of this control point where something could go wrong, we generally have SOPs for. So we even have hand washing SOPs that are like, here's how you correctly wash your hands.
It sounds like a tremendous amount of communication. Like I know farm managers, I'm assuming that a lot of times they're the ones that you get approached by. But if they have workers, my goodness, I'm thinking of when you mentioned SOPs, that there's got to be sort of almost like a chain of command or chain of communication down the farm. Is that the case when you have workers? I guess there's special procedures or just straight up communication. I mean, how is that typically handled?
Yeah, we try to hammer home the idea that, you don't want to approach this as like just jumping through hoops that are a hassle. That the best way to do this is to kind of try and instill a food safety culture amongst the workers. Have them kind of take some accountability with it. You want to encourage them to, if they see anything that they're concerned about, to say something to you. Kind of like if you're training a dog, you want to make sure that if they do something wrong, there's kind of this positive reinforcement thing that you're trying to do with your workers. If they see something, don't admonish them for pointing it out. Say, okay, thank you for letting me know. Let's figure this out. But yeah, it's training is a huge part of it. And yeah, it's usually not something that's an egregious food safety issue that causes a problem. Really it can be something as simple as poor hand washing, or irrigation water. It's not like people are seeing lettuce with bird poop on it and harvesting it and putting it into the supply chain. But yeah, it's training is a huge part of it. And we do hammer that home, that once you kind of develop all this stuff, it's very important to train at least annually. And when you hire somebody to the jobs that they'll specifically do on the farm.
I immediately went to fold in the cheese. For any of you who've watched Schitt's Creek, she's like, "What does that mean? Fold in the cheese?
It just says fold it in.
Just fold it in.
Just fold it in."
I understand, but what does that mean? And I just feel like that's SOPs right there. Like that's not what you. That's what you don't want. But no, what does that mean?
Sure. And you could write an SOP where you said something exactly like that, and you would think everybody knows that. And then when you watch somebody perform that SOP, and they say, "What the hell does this mean?"
I've had farm managers that will test stuff out on their new workers that really don't have a clue and they never worked, in that environment. And I'm told that sometimes they're shocked at some of the simple things that, like, new workers that really are, at ground zero. They're like, what does this mean? And then the manager has to go back and then they're like, oh, we need to be more clear about that, what we're assuming that they know. So yeah, folding the cheese. That's a perfect example. Yeah, it's really good.
Well, one of the things that I've always appreciated about your work, and I think I'm speaking as someone, I work more at the state level. Jessica and Ray and Alexis until recently work at the county level and get a little more of that direct contact. But a lot of the work that you're doing is very intensive, direct contact with producers, and I think it's really appropriate for the nature of the type of work that you're doing. So I'd like to give you a second to just kind of brag a little bit on your success and your progress on getting people trained. How many folks have you had going through audits? What do you see as the future of the work that you're doing? Whether that be supplemental resources that are needed or anything like that. I'd just love to hear a little bit about, 8 years in, figuring it out. What's that look like?
Yeah. When I first started, I think there were, to our knowledge, there were about 7 or 8 gap audited farms in the state, very large farms, and most of them in Western Kentucky that were doing like watermelon, I think, something of that nature. And to this day, we have had, I believe we just updated the numbers, and I believe we have had 51 farms get audited, unique farms. We've had over 170 audits. So this is an annual. The audits are annual, if you're going to maintain your GAP certification. So some farms do and some farms don't, because they get into the wholesale market. And well, let's be honest, first off, either the wholesale market may not be what they're looking for, may not have been what they wanted. But let's also be honest about the pandemic and what it did to wholesale everything. So that changed things quite a bit.
Well, can you explain what for those?
Let me jump off and explain that part. So the pandemic really crushed wholesale distribution because all of the larger places, institutions, schools, hospital, cafeterias shut down.
Restaurants,
everything overnight. And so all of those farms that had built up the ability to meet that demand lost, in produce, you're generally not operating off of a contract. You've got somebody's word they're going to buy something for you. And when something like that happens, they're not going to buy it from you. And it did cause a lot of farms in the state to pivot to direct to consumer models. A lot of folks went online, we'll deliver it to your door, or we will curate a bag or some sort of pickup for you at the farmer's market, so that we're kind of limiting human contact. And consumers responded. They responded big time. They really bought into those markets, and everything really took off there. And so a lot of the folks that had tried wholesale and were kind of borderline on it, and then had success selling direct to consumer, never came back. But some of them did. And now we see a lot of folks that are doing things like transitioning from growing tobacco, so having large acreage, are starting to see some of these distribution systems work and produce in the state. And so they're saying, okay, well, I can take the 20 acres that I used to grow tobacco on and maybe grow squash. And then, through that process, somebody says, well, you got to contact this guy and get a gap audit, and you got to contact this guy and do this and this person and do that. But yeah, we've had 51 farms, 6 facilities, I think. And so the facilities are generally just kind of aggregating, packing, and storing. And then, the thing that I'm most proud of is that we have a 100% success rate in passing the audit the first time.
Hell yeah.
That comes with we're very clear with you about you're ready or you're not ready. I do not want you to have an auditor come out and you end up wasting money on them. We've had some really tough audits in the past, but everybody's passed. And we play kind of an intimate role in like helping you get to that endpoint where you're going to have the audit, and we say, hey, you're ready.
You're teaching to the test. Yeah. Which is a good thing. That's a great thing. Yeah.
Well, I think, and one of the things, I'll just to put a little finer point on that success, is that for the 51 farms that have passed, I don't even know how many, probably 3 or 4 to 1, as many who said, maybe I'm interested, and you helped them understand what gap was, what wholesale markets were. And the number of people who were interested in this and were kind of coming to you and got referred to, that I referred to you, is way, way more than that. And it's something that we do a lot in extension. It's something you mentioned earlier of like, I'm not trying to push somebody into wholesale markets.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a really good outlook to have in this type of work, because, you could be 150 people that I got through these gap audits, and 3/4 of them were miserable and decided that it was a waste of time and money. And it's like, that's not a success. And so I think that's a really, really cool achievement. And I think that the idea of providing information so people can make their own decision and then support them if they decide to go in that direction that's like the nature of the work that we do in extension. And I think that's really, it should be recognized as much as the 51 that did, as the other folks who decided, I'm going to go in a different direction, or I'm going to pivot to direct to consumer. So so as far as like the funding for your position, the collaborator type people for your work, is there anybody that comes to mind in particular that you work a lot with, or that, other organizations maybe people haven't heard of that they want to check out?
Yeah. So my position was originally, actually it's still funded. Half of it's funded by the Kentucky Horticulture Council. And a lot of the rest of it's funded through grants. So it's kind of a soft funded position. But we work really directly with the Horticulture Council, and Cindy Finiseth, who is leaving as the executive director of the Horticulture Council, and during her time has done some amazing work. Has maintained a 75% cost share actually for the audit, up to $1,250. We've reached a point where audits kind of fall into 2 categories. One, if you have to go with one of the larger audits, you're probably going to go over that $1,250 mark, but you're at least going to get 75% of $1,250 back. And it will probably make financial sense for you to do one of those bigger audits. We're not going to, like you said, we're not going to push a farm that it doesn't make sense to enter one of these larger markets and pay so much out of pocket to get the audit. And then there's another group of farms really that are kind of able to do slightly cheaper audits. And after the cost share, it's really like $200, $300 out of pocket, which is great. It's been a difference maker for lots of farms. some farms that were borderline needed that help in the first year. And the goal for that cost share is to help farms get over the hump the first year, then enter a wholesale market, start making some money, and then next year potentially pay for it themselves. We do a lot of work with Food Systems Innovation Center as well, as far as resource development goes. And we're constantly trying to develop resources that are useful for farmers. One of the things that we worked on a little bit this year is developing a web-based app where farms can keep records like real time in the field.
Wow.
We actually had one of our farmers say, "Hey, we're going to keep our records digital this year. Is that okay?" And it's like, yeah, that's honestly, if you can timestamp them, that's even better, because then you can recall whatever you need. You can even take pictures of something that might have happened in the field and keep track of it that way. And it was actually one of his H2A workers that, said, "Boss, we don't want to keep clipboards out in the field and keep records this way anymore. I want to just use my phone." And they kind of lit a light off in our head that said, I wonder if we can do like a web-based app where people can keep simple records.
Nice.
And we're hopefully we can roll it out for people to play around with fruit and veg, or at least make people aware of it. And then next season we can kind of have some people test it out for us. The one thing that we want is for them to be able to develop their own records, like own record keeping sheet on there. We don't want everything to be like cut and dry. So that's one of the things that we've, kind of done. Let's see what else. We've worked with K-Card. We direct people to K-Card to get, because there's a lot of money out there right now in produce farming. And so we will direct people to K-Card to think about different grants and stuff. Center for Crop Diversification has been a great place for us to put resources on. We also have, tons of extension associates at the University of Kentucky that we spread information around with. Somebody's got this training, somebody's got this class, somebody's got this resource. There's quite a few partner organizations. We've worked with Oak to do some trainings. We've worked with Black Soil to do some trainings. So I think, it's people, it's much more common knowledge now that food safety is going to be something that has to be dealt with if you want to do something in the produce world. And people have come to us to kind of help with that. And, like you said, the one-on-one stuff is really, I think, why we're successful, because farmers' attitudes change when you go out on the farm and meet them face to face and you tell them you can do this. If you just send the stuff to them and they look at it, it's very overwhelming. So if you can go out there and you can tell them you can do this, and then they shake hands with you, a lot of times that's where the difference is made in whether or not they do it or not.
I mean, I think the thing I was mainly just trying to emphasize, and you did great, to that there's like all of these different people working in support of Kentucky agriculture, Kentucky farmers, and I think you have done a really great job of being networked with all of them and being plugged in. And I never hear a negative. I only hear positive things about you from these different organizations and groups, which speaks to, I think, the value of what you're bringing and how you're doing it. Just to let you know, if you had not name dropped CCD, this comment would have gone very differently.
Very poorly.
It's been I don't know. It's just been cool to follow, because you and I started in the general ballpark around the same time, and to just kind of follow the progress of the program as it's developed and in response to need. And I'll just give a shout out in general to the former executive director of the Food Connection, Lillian Brislin, who. Yes. Like the reason you all got into food safety in large part in the first place was because it was a need. It wasn't because anybody was like super jazzed about food safety. It was
yeah.
In order to sell these institutional markets, we're going to need this kind of support. And that's what do people need? How can we respond to it? And I think that ethos that you've carried through has just been really cool. This wasn't supposed to be a Bryan love sesh, but I can't help myself.
It should be, though. It should be a Bryan love sesh. Like when I was in the county and I had growers who were just like, we feel confident about spending the money to do it, and or we feel confident knowing that this is not the right place for us. And so and that was in big part thanks to like Bryan and his team. And so you save people a lot of money, but also a lot of just like stress of the audit. Like they felt confident, and obviously it shows that you're good at what you do if you've had 100% success rate. So cheers, Bryan.
Thanks. And it is actually a team now. We've grown. And yeah, Lily realized at the very beginning that, oh man, we got to have somebody do this. And we've grown since she's left. We've had Ashton Potter take over, and she has brought on some value chain coordinators that work for Eastern, Central, and Western Kentucky. And this is a plug for them too. If you don't know they exist, they do. And they have created a great network for connecting people to me as well. They help in not just the produce space. They're also animal protein, value-added products, things like that. So they're there trying to make the connections with buyers. And then also on our team directly, the Cultivate Kentucky program that does this gap audit assistance, we've hired Courtney Bartlett as well. And so she's helped really, she's added value. It hasn't been taking work off of my plate so much as it's been, we're able to do more work. And, hopefully in the off season here, we're able to produce more resources that are useful, not just, pumping out publications for the sake of pumping out publications, but actually useful stuff that, people might actually take a look at.
How dare you? How dare you approach it that way?
I am not. That is not a
fool. Reference. That's not what we do here.
Just pump them out. Who cares what they say?
Them out.
Yeah.
No, I care because now I'm in charge of getting them published, and you just hold off on those as long as you want to.
Yeah, Alexis is moving one through for us right now.
Well, she's dabbling, but So Bryan, if anybody needs to get a hold of you, how do you recommend should they go to their county office first? Should they look you up online? Kind of if they're going, this sounds like something I should be doing, what would you recommend?
I'd email me. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Of course, there are farms out there that can't use email. So, I have worked with a number of Plain community farmers, Amish and Mennonite farmers. So oftentimes I get directed to them through either a county agent or a value chain coordinator. But yeah, my email is definitely the easiest way to get a hold of me. And we, one of the things that's been great since Courtney came on is she's really helped us. She's got a master's in library science. So she's really helped us get organized and onboard people in a much more formal way.
Did she make you whisper?
No. Quiet.
Shh.
Yeah, right.
And Bryan, again, if people just want to use a keyword search to find you, the name of your umbrella group, you said you guys have grown, but is what again? Yes. If you don't care to throw that out again.
So if you search Cultivate Kentucky Food Connection, so Food Connection is the department and Cultivate Kentucky is our program, it should bring you to the Food Connection page that has my contact info on it.
Great. Thank you.
It's a pretty cool name, Cultivate Kentucky. It's pretty clever.
Love it.
Clever play on words there.
It was before I can't take any credit for that. They came up with that before.
I mean, are they still here? Just take credit for it.
Yeah, I don't. Really not. Like quite a few of them were. It was Bluegrass Value Chain Coordinator and
Bluegrass Farm to Table.
Bluegrass Farm to Table, and
Louisville Farm to Table.
Bluegrass
both of which don't exist anymore, right?
Yeah,
right.
I was like,
Bluegrass Farm to Table became our executive director.
So boom, Bryan invented Cultivate Kentucky. You heard it here first from him.
He said it, not us.
It must be true.
Awesome. Well, Bryan, we appreciate you being on with us today and giving our listeners kind of a heads up of how you're helping Kentucky farmers keep them safe and that they can feel good about buying local products, because we are making sure that they are washing their hands properly and they are keeping puddles from outside of their sheds. So we appreciate all the hard work that you do. And anybody else? Any lasting questions? Awesome. Well, that's all we have for you folks today. Feel free to reach out. Our email is in the show notes. If you have any questions or thoughts, or you can't find Bryan for some reason, feel free to reach out to us. You can also follow us on Instagram at Hort Culture Podcast. You can send us information on there. And we just kind of remind you, we've got episodes. If you hit follow on this podcast, then you'll automatically get those episodes when they're available, and you can leave a wonderful thing and say Bryan is the best, and no one else can help you like he can, and you can put that in the review, and we will pass along that information as you give us 5 stars, and we will know those 5 stars were really for Bryan, and we appreciate him too. So thanks for being here with us, and we hope that as we grow this podcast, you'll grow with us and that you'll join us next time. See ya.